There is a very close relationship, a common objective of the Russians and the Chinese. So there is a competition in the world, and there's a dominant world power which is perceived as being overly controlling. So the Chinese believe that the policy of containment of the United States, in other words, just right within their borders, that there isn't a region that's suitable for them, in much the same way as the United States. There's always a geographic region as an area of influence. The United States in the area like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuba, when there's a threatening power in Cuba, we reacted to that. That kind of geopolitics, they believe that the United States is sort of containing them, and they are growing in power. So that there's that dynamic, and Russia has the same kind of view, and so that there's a common, let's call it enemy, competitor. And there are 5 types of wars. There's a trade war, there's a technology war, there's a geopolitical influence war, there is a capital war, and then there's a military shooting war. And we are in the first 4 of those wars in this competition. We are in a shooting war of sorts with Russia and the Ukraine. We're providing arms, and so they're shooting, and so there's a military war going on, and we're in it in our way. So we're at those particular spots. And the capital war is sanctions. We hear the notion of sanctions, and what that means is they're economic, and the way they work is to shut off, to produce economic pain by either not letting them get at their money, or not letting them get to goods that they can import. And these have happened through time. In Japan, that was what set us up for the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because the United States cut off Japan's oil supply, was in the process of doing that, and also confiscated its bonds, much the same way as happening now. And that put them into a corner that led them to bomb Pearl Harbor, and then we went to a military war. So that's where we are now, and that also is risky because it threatens the value of the dollar. Because right now, debt is dollars. Any currency, the way you hold it is you hold it in the form of debt. You don't hold it just in paper. And because there's a rising inflation, and because there's a lot of printing of money, and because there's also a greater fear on a number of countries that they too could be sanctioned, there is a selling of dollar-denominated debt. So you're seeing that the bond market is going down. And so there is that dynamic that's going on. The capital wars are the ones that accelerate immediately before the military wars. Usually the coffers are empty, they're printing a lot of money, and then they're trying to use economics as a weapon. So we're in that part of the cycle. Now, in terms of how this will transpire, I think there are 3 big questions that we're going to learn about and get answers to pretty quickly. The first is, does Putin and Russia win or lose? I'll describe win as what he wanted at the outset, which is win for Russia would be to have the Ukraine be some non-threatening position, such as a neutrality, a guaranteed neutrality. and for Russia to have control over eastern provinces, and for Russia not to be economically devastated, instead to be maybe have something like a 10 or 12% decline in GDP, and for Putin to be in power. If those four things happen, then the cost of his actions will have been worth what was obtained from that. And that would be viewed as a win. It would be then also a loss from the Western countries. The world is looking at the power of American sanctions because American sanctions are the greatest power the United States has. If it was a military power, the world has come to the position that a number of countries have had an equal ability to do harm to the United States militarily as the United States have to do to them. And so we don't have a dominant military power anymore. But we do have a dominant sanctions power. In the United States, in the ability to influence, have economic sanctions is much ahead because it controls the world's reserve currency. That's the biggest asset. But in weaponizing the dollar, it is leading those to get around and not want to hold dollars because they get worried that they're going to be confiscated. So, so we will see if that dollar sanctions power, we'll see how powerful it is. If it isn't very powerful, that's going to be a problem. Then you only have military power. I mean, think about this way. If this war is not a difficult war for the United States and Europe for the most important, it produces higher oil prices and the like. But while Russia is throwing in military, we are throwing in sanctions. And these sanctions don't cost lives. It's not a military war. So we're fighting it with sanctions and they're fighting it with military. If you didn't have that, how would you fight this war? It would be a much more difficult situation. And the third thing that we're seeing is how the world is lining up. The world is lining up, which, there are in wars, typically Axis and allied powers. And you could see by the actions that are taken as to which are lining up. Who voted in favor of what at the United Nations? Who is allowing what rules? Who is trading with the other party? Russia actually put out a list who are friendly and adversarial countries. You'll see at the next G20 meeting who will be in favor of Russia attending that meeting and who will be in favor of it not attending. And that's making clear how the sides are lining up. So you're seeing those sides line up and all sides